Lost in the shuffle yesterday with the big announcement out of Mar-a-Lago was a tiny little news item that, well, it's official. The Republicans now have the majority in the House. You know what that means. It means that Nancy Pelosi is no longer Speaker of the House. Gonna miss her. It also means that Republicans can start jockeying for leadership positions and committee chairmanships in the House of Representatives. Huge decisions about to be made by the Republican caucus, some of them already in the works. And oh, by the way, what's going on in the Senate? Oh, and let's not forget the Democrats have their own leadership decisions. Are they going to stick with Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer? Well, I don't know, but I know someone who might know. Nate Hochman, he's a staff writer at National Review. He's covering all this stuff. Hey, Nate, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Let's start with one vote that happened yesterday that I know that you weren't thrilled with. That's Congressman Emmer out of Minnesota, who ended up winning the majority whip position, now vacated by Congressman Scalise, who moves up to the majority leader position. This was an interesting vote, the way it sort of shook down, wasn't it?
Yeah, it came right down to the wire. I think Emmer beat Jim Banks, who is the runner-up, by 9 votes, something like 115 to 106.
And by the way, Nate, that was on the second ballot, right? Because on the first ballot, Emmer was in 3rd place, but then obviously major jockeying and horse trading went on.
Yeah, it's, classic sort of behind closed doors leadership stuff. There's a third guy, Drew Ferguson. His votes split on the second ballot, and they ended up breaking for Emmer. But regardless, the point is, Tom Emmer is not a friend of conservatives, and particularly social conservatives. He was one of 9 House Republicans to vote to block the Trump administration's transgender ban. He's voted to allow biologically male people who are working in federal contractors and in female restrooms. He voted for the same-sex marriage bill. So he is someone who is really unreliable, whereas Jim Banks, his competitor, was a really strong conservative.
Yeah.
So all in all, it just hasn't been a great week or so for the right.
Well, and also Emmer was the leader of the Republican Congressional Committee. It was his job to get the majority in the House. And I think by all intents and purposes, yes, you got the majority, but it sure should have been bigger. So again, Republicans sort of failing upward in leadership. And it's other than Scalise, who is an outlier, isn't it remarkable that so many of the voices in Republican leadership end up being from very blue states like California and Minnesota?
Well, in New York, Elise Stefanik is back as the head of the conference chair. I think the only real sort of staunch conservative that I'm aware of who's actually reliable is Scalise.
Yeah.
But your point, is outside of any ideological debates, I need the Republican leadership to be competent. And the kind of guy like Tom Emmer, who just barely eked out a House majority in what was supposed to be an overwhelming red wave year, I just don't have a lot of confidence that he's actually going to be someone who can lead this slim House majority to success.
Yeah, the whip, frankly, is probably the most important position when you've got a tiny majority, even more important than the speaker. Let's talk about Kevin McCarthy. He had, 30 or 31 Republicans who did not vote for him to be speaker. That's not uncommon. If I remember right, Nancy Pelosi had some outliers when last Congress, but she did end up becoming speaker because she made concessions to the Ilhan Omars and Ocasio-Cortezes and such. Is that what happens here? You've got 44 members of the Freedom Caucus, and all Kevin McCarthy has to do is basically say to them, okay, fine, give me your votes on the floor in January, and you'll have a major voice here. Is it as simple as that, or is it more complicated?
Well, it's never as simple as that. I'm sure there will be tons of sort of behind closed doors negotiations. And with this slim of majority, Kevin McCarthy isn't going to be able to go to the bathroom without asking for Marjorie Taylor Greene's permission. So it's going to be a...
wow, Nate, that's a hell of an image you just painted for all of us. Thanks for that one.
Viewers for that analogy. But it's only a slight exaggeration. So I think a lot of the sort of 31 or so House Freedom Caucus Republicans who voted against McCarthy, they never really expected that he actually wasn't going to become speaker. It's saber rattling because they know that if they can make a show of force, they can extract concessions from him.
Right.
And that's probably what they're going to get going forward.
And that's what they're looking for. I know that Andy Biggs put his name out there as a potential congressman from Arizona. But at this point, it really is just McCarthy's to sort of solidify the caucus behind him. Is there a lane for somebody, Nate, to actually make another play before the House vote in the first week of January? People have to understand it's the entire House of Representatives that votes for Speaker. This is not just the caucus vote. So he can't afford to lose anybody.
Right. It's always possible, right? This is an unprecedented year. We're living in unprecedented times, but it is not likely, A, if you look at the historical record, and B, if you just look at what the actual dynamics are within the caucus right now. If House Republicans had rallied behind a viable alternative at this point, then McCarthy would have a real problem on his hands.
Yeah.
But someone like Andy Biggs doesn't command the support of the majority of the caucus. So there isn't really a viable challenger as it stands right now.
And let's be real, I'm not going to lie. I doubt anybody really wants to be Speaker with a majority this tight. It's going to be maybe 4 seats, maybe 5 seats when all the counting is done. And that ain't a great job. Sure, a lot of power comes with it, a lot of prestige comes with it, but it's going to be a headache, whoever gets it. All right, let's swing over to the Senate, which is interesting now that Senator Rick Scott has officially challenged Mitch McConnell for the leadership role. McConnell says he's got the votes. It's just a question of when you have the votes, sooner or later, but he's still going to get it. Is that just gravitas and sort of hubris, or is that pretty much cut and dry? It's McConnell's.
No, I think it's pretty cut and dry. I don't really understand why Rick Scott is running against McConnell. Look, there are plenty of things that you can criticize Mitch McConnell for this cycle, and I think calls to delay the Senate leadership vote are entirely merited. But someone like Rick Scott, I don't understand what his pitch is that he would actually be someone who could, replace McConnell. He was the head of a lot of the Senate campaign operations that actually failed this election, and he doesn't actually have the same sort of claim to control of the caucus that Mitch McConnell does. So he's basically Mitch McConnell with less going for him, and I don't really understand why anyone would support him over McConnell at this point.
Let's swing over to frankly, I think the real drama is on the Democrat side of the House of Representatives. No word yet from Nancy Pelosi as to whether she wants to retain her position as minority leader. No indication necessarily that she would keep that position. And if she doesn't, is Steny Hoyer just, a fait accompli, or will they actually overlook Mr. Hoyer and all of his years of service subservient to Nancy Pelosi and have a whole new round of leadership? There's a lot of drama over with the Democrats.
Right, there is. And look, say what you will about House Republican leadership, but at least they have a sort of slate of up-and-coming, relatively young Republican leaders who are being groomed by the previous leadership for positions of power. Nancy Pelosi and her sort of very small cohort of leadership, who are all approaching sort of 70s and even 80s at this point, have made no effort to really train and prepare a new slate of potential leaders to take over for them, because I think they wanted to maintain their hold on power for as long as possible. And you're seeing that now. Who is going to be the next sort of Democratic speaker after Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer? No one has a name, because there isn't really any sort of second or third runner-up right now, and Pelosi doesn't seem to think that that's an issue. So once she finally exits Congress, I don't really know what Democrats are going to do. It's completely up for grabs right now.
I sort of feel sorry for Steny Hoyer. I know he thinks that he's just going to be the heir apparent, but something tells me Democrats are going to say, let's move on from this entire generation. Real fast, on the committee chairmanships there for the Republicans, should we just assume that whoever the ranking member was in this last session will immediately become the chairman, or is there more at play there in who gets it and how it's chosen?
I can't claim to have any sort of more insight into sort of internal caucus dynamics than you do, but I would hope after this absolute devastating failure of the red wave to materialize almost everywhere across the country, Republicans would take a good, long, hard look at who's leading their campaign infrastructure and pick someone who represents a very different direction than the one that they took this cycle.
Well, I mean, the campaign infrastructure was McCarthy and Emmer, and they're both moving on. So I don't know if your hope is going to be fulfilled. Real fast, and I do mean real fast, does President Trump's announcement yesterday to run for re-election, does that affect any of this? Does it affect the agenda for the Republican majority in this next Congress?
Well, it's tough to say. I mean, look, Trump endorsed McCarthy. So I think it's someone like Andy Biggs was running without Trump's endorsement, and Trump got behind, I think, a lot of the Republicans who got us into this mess. So I don't know how that plays out, in the coming 2 years, but that's certainly the record that he has right now.
I think it's fair to say, if you're like us and you love watching politics and the drama of it and sort of the contests involved internally in politics, this is pretty fun stuff to observe, and we're lucky to have a front row seat. Thanks, Nate. We'll call on you again.
Hey.
More to come on O'Connor Tonight.